Hi, and we're live. Guys, I'm probably a couple of minutes early, but I wanted just to come in early just to see if, as people roll in. But the talk style just ran for a couple of minutes, so sorry if you're watching this after the fact. Oh, come on, start talking. Sorry, I'll get there. Or maybe I should just kind of start. All right, so I've come in today to talk about Qigong. Now, I've been practicing Qigong for 25 years, but still daily when I talk to people and I say, oh, I do Qigong, they're like, you do what? I'm like, I do Qigong. They're like, what? What's that? And so I have to go through a laborious process all the time, telling people exactly what Qigong is about. And I find it quite sad that Qigong isn't well known. And what I'm finding more and more as I talk about Qigong and more as I run courses, that people are starting to hear about Qigong. Qigong is starting to pop up everywhere. And I've been waiting for the best part of half my life for Qigong to get really popular, wondering why I'm the only person who ever talks about this or ever does it, or stand in the path looking a little bit strange. So it's really nice and it warms my heart. And I do firmly believe that we're going to see Qigong really emerge into its own right and become as popular as and hopefully, I believe anyway, yoga and other exercises, just because of the rich contextual and diverse wisdom and information and almost technology that it offers us to work with ourselves in a way that I don't believe is very well done or highlighted or entertained by many other modalities. And there are some that touch on elements of Qigong and of Qigong-like body states or movements. And again, they're growing more and more every week, just watching stuff online. So I find it really fascinating, really heartwarming, because in many ways I believe Qigong has a message. The practice has a message that I think the world need at this time. And I've been talking to lots of people about this, students, clients, people online. And when I begin to rant and begin to talk, because I'm passionate, it just tends to start flowing out of me uncontrollably. I'm finding that people are really resonating with that and they agree and they can see it in their own lives and within society. So with this talk, what I hope that you can gain from coming in and listening to me for about an hour, rant away, is an understanding of what Qigong is. Now, when a lot of people talk about Qigong, they quite often go into very mystical descriptions quite early on, and they start talking about Qi and energy, and they go into all this ancient, mystical, Chinese, almost magical style information. And whilst that's great, personally, in my background and where I've come from, I think that's a little bit like, and I was saying this to a friend today while I was talking to them, that it's like walking into a beginner's yoga class and expecting to all of a sudden be a pranayama master. It's like going past all the basic physiological changes that you need to go through before really a lot of the esoteric stuff begins to blossom. And even though people do have that experience, like even as the Buddha talks about, getting stuck on certain manifestations of meditation and stuff can be tricky and can be a bit of an addiction. And so I like this idea of bringing Qigong back to a very physical reality and presenting it in a sense that is very 21st century and that can link into a lot of the other information that science is discovering and that the movement culture from around the world is starting to explore with movement and explore with philosophy. And I tend to see that a lot of these are already embodied within Qigong, and Qigong is a very, I'll go three-dimensional, very spherical, it's not even circular, it's a very spherical, very rounded gathering of a lot of information. Essentially, the best way to distill that down is to how to grow the human body. It sets up ways and pathways of developing us neurologically and physically and emotionally and spiritually, with all these layers almost being like homogeneously embedded in a four-dimensional chemical soup that is our body. So hopefully tonight, through what I'm saying, you'll get a picture of this three-dimensional construct of what the body is and how Qigong works with the body in that way to provide a range of healing elements and healing states, and a way of beingness that helps this almost liquid crystal shell of ours morph and change and develop, and as I said, literally grow it into a new way of being. So a little bit about me. So when I was a young fella, like I was 7 or 8, my father was a marathon runner, and he'd get down every night and after a hard run for the week or whatnot, and I'd dig knots out, and he found that I had a bit of a knack with these suckers for digging knots out, and so that slowly morphed onto me also massaging my sister, who was a martial artist, and mum got some freebies because she's mum, and I did a good little pocket money trade with my massage as a kid. Now I went through high school and that, and became a teen, didn't think about it too much, but one afternoon I decided I better go and look for a job. I was just teaching myself guitar, sitting on a balcony across the Broadwater here on the Gold Coast. So I better go get a job, and I went and got employed at SeaWorld, where I met a Welshman who'd come to Australia to study Tai Chi, the martial art of Tai Chi. Now, through becoming friends with him, I kind of became his punching dummy. So he was practicing martial arts, so he taught me to throw punches, and he would defend against them. And slowly on, I started taking on this idea of the martial arts and training with him. And involved in this was a lot of Qigong. Now, Tai Chi Quan, or you know it as Tai Chi Chuan or Tai Chi. I tend to pronounce it Tai Chi Quan, which is a little bit more Chinesey. So just understand that Tai Chi and Tai Chi Quan are pretty much the same thing. So through getting involved in this martial art where there was a lot of Qigong, I came to understand that, like you've got yoga, and then you've got all these little offshoots of yoga coming out. You've got, pranayama, ashtanga, and all the rest, all the different types of yoga. Qigong's the same. You've kind of got Qigong, and you've got all these different types of Qigong, of which Tai Chi is one. And so, as far as I can tell, and without going into massive amounts of historics and lineages, which is not really something I'm particularly interested in, someone along the line discovered embodying Qigong into their martial art. Now, there's kind of two distinct forms of these Qigongs. You've got a Shaolin, and most people here will have heard the word Shaolin, the Shaolin monks, who do a very external, very physical form of Qigong, which is why they perform feats, different feats of breaking things with their arms and hands and things like that to demonstrate the energy development and the physical conditioning they've done. And then there was another branch which came from Wudang Mountain, which is lesser known. And even though this is not necessarily historically correct, these were broken up into internal from the Wudang Mountain and more like an external system from Shaolin. And there's many inaccuracies and stories and Chinese whispers in that, so I don't like to get into that. But the basic idea is that the Wudang system was very gentle, and it had a very different approach to Qigong. And this is kind of one of the lineages I come in with Tai Chi, where they started to use this in the martial art that they called loose boxing. And the idea was to get the body to be really strong, but also really soft, as well as having all the extra physical and spiritual and emotional development that people wanted from a martial art, which is why there was so much meditation and Qigong involved, because it wasn't necessarily in Chinese time, even though that people would have had to fight for their lives there, it wasn't necessarily about ego and having to prove ourselves. It was more about just defending villages and defending towns and about security for the self. So it wasn't so aggressive and so violent. There's a lot of honor and things like that involved, and I'm sure at other times maybe not. But regardless, so the Qigong from this Tai Chi Quan has remained with a style of movement that generates from its core. And so what I learnt while learning the martial art was this system of what's called internal or whole body movement. And this whole body movement is literally a way of rippling intent or rippling mass, the mass of your body through and out to the outside of the world. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about this, and I'll tell a little story that explains this a little bit better. But what this means is the Chinese viewed, and I'll stand up a little bit, our core, torso of our body, a bit like you can imagine I've got a tube of toothpaste in my hands, okay? Now I'm going to take the lid off this toothpaste, and I'm going to throw the toothpaste cap away, and then I'm squeeze the tube. And by squeezing the tube, toothpaste will come out, right? So by squeezing our core, by squeezing the core of our body and getting it to move in different ways and open and close, we can actually squeeze mass and ripple mass of our body through our extremities and out. Much like the toothpaste moving, this is the way that we can squeeze our core and cause toothpaste to come out our arms, because there's no tension. There's no physical tension. Everything has become very soft. And it's about softening into our structure that allows our body to be held tightly together. Okay, so I'll backtrack a little bit now. So that's a little bit of how I kind of got into this. I fell into it through basically, then I went to study massage. Think I could earn myself some money as a massage therapist, but I actually walked out, enrolled in acupuncture. I continued studying the martial arts and practicing Qigong, so that was started 26 years ago, and I've been an acupuncturist now for about 20 years, so that's roughly about 23 years of study of the Chinese medicine as well. So through doing this all this time, I've come to understand how important the message is that Qigong has. I've come to understand through my personal observations and the personal challenges I've had to go through in my life, and how Qigong has help me move through these, help me adapt, and sometimes the martial artist help me express energy by literally doing martial arts that are a Qigong. So, and expressing that energy through my body so it's not retained. And this is really what a lot of Qigong is about. It's about softening the body through and allowing this energy and things that arise in us to move quite effortlessly through us. Okay, so what is Qigong? Qigong is so many different things, and just like we have different types of yoga, there's so many different types of Qigong, and you will speak and you will read and you'll find numerous pages all over the web and all over things about different styles of Qigong, and that's great because it's really diverse and there's a lot of information out there. But it really comes down to three main things with Qigong. It is about working the Jing Chen Shi cycle, and that's really technical, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but I'll try and weave that into my stories. It's about regulating that Jing Qi Shen cycle through using breath, the mind, and regulating the body through posture. And then it's about cultivating energy so you can move energy through the system. So Qigong is not so much about detox like we might think in a Western sense. And Chinese medicine in all is not really about detoxes. Actually, in Chinese medicine, they say if you need to detox, just eat really healthily and be really well for a consistent period of time and your body will cleanse. Whereas here in the West, I meet people who use all sorts of potions and lotions and diets and stuff to just constantly dredge their body and actually make their body have to work harder to keep up with the demands they're putting on, as opposed to trying to come back just into health. So it's a very different way to look at it. And I run a Qigong teacher training program here in Australia, and one of my recent graduates who went through the program actually started a little business called Qi Talks, because through her experience of doing Qigong daily through the course, she actually had like a mini physical, emotional, and spiritual detox event happen for her, and she was absolutely amazed. So this is kind of the idea in Chinese culture that we build our energy to actually to transcend, to move, to grow past things. We don't have to keep dredging and taking away and trying to go into the past to deal with things. We're actually just trying to grow ourselves from the point we are forward and create new patterns of being, and allowing old patterns just to fall away without trying to engage them too much. And this really goes into the way we work with our body. When I start talking about softening and aspects of this, you'll again see that concept in Chinese, which is about filling ourselves up with energy and letting the rest of everything else just fall away quite naturally. And this should happen. Energy should transmute. Energy should keep moving. And so this is really the process we're working on. So I did mention the Jing Chen Qi cycle, so I'll just jump into there for a moment. Now, we see this cycle everywhere in nature. Without going into specific kind of examples, the Jing Chen Qi cycle, I believe, is very similar in ways to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you don't know about that, this guy Maslow basically created, I think it's like 5 different tiered layers in a pyramid that went up from basic needs of like survival to human needs being met, and then to personal needs of like self-actualization being met. But it's very interesting, we actually see a very clear representation here about the idea of people starting off in almost, and I'll use an Indian concept because it'll be easier, like a base chakra kind of concept, really down in our survival, and we need to breed, eat, drink water, so fight off dangerous animals, stuff like that. And then we come through more into family and community areas as we get into the middle, and we start to develop ourselves and build communities, build villages, and start to really thrive. And then when we've got enough time on our hands, we can sit back and we can paint and do art and write literature and produce symphonies. And so this is really a good concept for the Jing Chen Qi cycle, and the way that Qigong builds us and grows us physically and neurologically into a state of evolution. Okay, so the Jing is essentially stored, and we're going to go super basic here, so I'm not going to, if there's some sort of factual inaccuracies, I'm trying to explain a concept more than go right into Chinese physiology. So the Jing is kind of like our very base chakra, our lower dantian. It's said to be stored in the kidneys. It's nice to think of our Jing as almost just being our DNA. Now, it's more than that, and it's not really DNA, but let's just consider it as just straight up DNA to begin with. It's our genetic code and our sequence that tells the rest of our body what to become. Higher up from our Jing is our Qi. Our Qi is our meat suit. Sorry, I picked up that term yesterday. This is our meat suit. So the Qi is literally, in the Chinese classics, in the medical classics, Qi isn't so much thought of as energy. Now we can think of, Qi's a massive conversation I don't want to get into here, so we can think of Qi as being like a universal oneness of everything, but when we're talking about the human body, our meat suit, our flesh and blood and bone is all Qi. It's not actually energy. The only energy substance in us is actually the next substance, which is Shen, which is our spirit, and is in the upper head, so from the chest up to our head. And this Shen builds up, and it's basically intellect, wisdom, spiritual development, that self-actualizing space within ourselves that we can climb to higher levels of thought and being. And so there's an analogy in Chinese for the Jing Chen Qi cycle, which is you have the moist earth, and that's the Jing. That's where everything comes from. Everything on earth has come out of the soil and out of the earth itself. Okay, so the earth gets heated by the sun. Okay, and that produces steam, which rises. That steam is said to be, and that middle area, that's above the soil, that's man, that's us. So where that steam, that's Qi. And then that steam comes up and condenses into clouds. And when there's enough water in the clouds, it rains down to become Jing. That Jing then builds in the earth, gets heated, becomes steam. That steam ascends to become Shen, and then that Shen rains down to become Jing. And so this is the cycle that should happen with this in Qigong, and is really the basic, complete reason. We're trying to get to this natural state where we're in a mindful state, and our body is in a tensegrity that is moving in a forward evolutionary way. We're growing into a new way of being. And I'll talk more about tensegrities now. This idea about how our structure, our posture, and the way of how holding our body helps with this in a moment. But yeah, so we have this concept of Jing. So in many ways, what we're doing in our Qigong is we're relaxing ourselves to a state where this Jing Chen Qi cycle happens, where through having a better stable base, we can produce more Qi and better Qi and grow our body into a strong posture, into a healthy mindset, doing the things, how we are applying our genetics to grow our body into the most complete, the fullest expression of ourselves. And then as our body grows, we develop the wisdom and the intellect and the personal character, which is our Shen. And as that builds up, that condenses, and we may come up with better ideas like, I'm going to move out of a cave and make a hut, plant a garden. Okay, and we start to get other things happening. And so that build up is that evolutionary stage that human beings are going through. Now, I hope I've explained that eloquently enough, but I want to move on a little bit to explaining more about this tensegrity concept and how, let me define tensegrity for a start, right? So, tensegrity systems are systems where the tension holds the structure together. Now, this is different to buildings. In buildings are compression-egrities. So you need the pressure of the roof to push down through the beam into the ground. So it's compressing on the beam to hold it up. Tensegrities work the opposite. The beam is actually free-floating and there's like cables or wires that are holding that beam in place. Now, we're a little bit of both because we've got gravity with the tensegrity pushing us down, but we're also, with the compression-egrity pushing us down for gravity. But really what's happening, if you were to think all our bones lying on the ground and you started strapping the ligaments and tendons and muscles on, the skeleton would slowly stack up and be freestanding. And even though it's compression from gravity holding down, the muscles, actually wrap the bones in a sling. And this term sling is being used a lot to explain the fascia chains that run through our muscles in our body, which is how we're moving when we're doing this internal movement. We're using these slings as springs to load and unload our body. So when our body's held in this tensegrity system, it becomes very free-floating, and it should have this nice elastic quality to it that's actually quite soft. Once the tension structures, so muscles and tendons, begin to become tight and become rigid, like when muscles get really tight and stiff, and then even it doesn't matter if they're long, if they don't have this elastic style softness, then that tensegrity can break down quite rapidly, and that's how we start to produce injuries. So what we're doing when we're doing our Qigong is we're actually softening into a structure. And so Bruce Lee describes this really well. Bruce Lee has a quote where he says, be like water, my friends. You know, you pour water into a cup and it takes the shape of a cup. Pour water into a teapot and it takes on the shape of that teapot. So what we're doing when we're doing Qigong is we're trying to cultivate Qi. We're breathing in, we're storing energy into our body and creating a pressure, filling up our structure, but then like the water, we're softening onto that structure. So I've been explaining this to a class. I work in a chronic pain hospital teaching Qigong to people that are suffering from chronic pain and different injuries. And I'm explaining to them all the time that we're going to breathe our crinkles out. And I really like this concept because, you know, when you get a mattress, an inflatable mattress, and a friend comes over to stay, and we've probably got spare bedrooms now, but you know, when you're a kid and you get a mattress and you inflate it, and the last kind of 15 to 10% of the mattress being inflated, the crinkles in the mattress fully open up, and now you've got a nice firm mattress. We're kind of doing the same in our body. We're going to breathe out the crinkles by inflating ourselves into a nice open structure, and relaxing and softening the body onto that structure so those crinkles fall out. Now what these crinkles are, and I put a little clip up on my on this wall in this group with the spider web. Now I hope you're not too scared of spiders, but it's all right. It doesn't fall on me or anything. She's quite happy where she is. This idea that the crinkles are actually the way that our connective tissue begins to become knotted. And so like when you go to a massage therapist or when you go to an acupuncturist, you're like, oh, I've got knots. So, you know, my shoulders crinked up or my muscles are really tight. They're holding all this tension. They're crinkles. They're things that are pulling the body out of shape, making us hunch our shoulders forward or poking our neck forward or holding the body in certain ways that makes this tensegrity system become susceptible to certain areas taking stress and strain. So hold on one moment, I'm going to disappear from the camera. Aha! Tensegrity. Right? Sorry about that. But with this tensegrity, you can see here that the beams, which are solid, are being actually held in place by the tension of the elastic cables. This is actually how our body works. And so when things are pulled apart, the space in the model increases. When things are compressed, the model gets smaller. Our body functions in much the same way. Our body actually acts like a pump a lot of the time. And this pumping action is facilitated by the fact that we're a giant tensegrity system. So what happens though is when our body is pulled out of structure, you see how some of the cables have actually gone quite weak. They're quite bent there. Whereas some of the cables, the ones in here, are super tight. That's what happens with our body when our tensegrity gets pulled out, which is why sometimes, you know, someone's tensegrity pattern may mean they get a sore shoulder. Another person's tensegrity might mean their elbow gets sore. Another person might mean that their neck gets completely put out. And so the different ways the tension is holding in our body is the different ways that the qi and blood are assigned. The different levels of pressure within the meridians are assigned around our body, and that allows for weak spots to show up, which causes our problems. Now, this brings us to a really important, a really interesting aspect of Qigong, where the softening is a way we actually begin to pull that tensegrity back into shape naturally. So I use an example here where, let's say I've got a headache and I get a headache pill, right? Some painkillers, and I take it. I'm putting in one compound. Okay, I've got this specific compound and there's millions and millions of little particles of it, and I swallow it. It goes down to my tummy and it digests. I'm assuming that that particle is going to have no other interactions in my body except it's just going to take up that headache and it's going to work on a specific pathway and I'll be fine. We're not taking into account the other millions and billions of tiny little interactions that chemical is going to go through in our body. It's like we're assuming with our giant brain that we know all the answers and not taking into account the fact that there's so many billions of tiny interactions happening. The only thing that can know possibly what to do with your body is your body. So what we're trying to find is a way to communicate to your body about what it needs to do. And so by softening, we're actually going to allow our structure to open up and relax and create movement. Now, again, in the spider web clip, and if you jump on the page after this and you wanted to watch it, you'll see it's just a picture of a spider web to begin with. It's just out in my backyard. I had to move a spider and I had to stretch his web. But in it, about 15 seconds into the clip, I show a picture of, from a microscope, with a white blood cell moving through what is almost like a three-dimensional spider web with all these crisscrossing framework. And that framework is actually our connective tissue of our body. And so when we've got these crinkles and our tensegrity is pulled out of alignment, it's like morphing a spider web out of shape and finding all the strands are now like spaghetti in the bottom of a pot and all mushed up and all tight. And what we're doing in Qigong is actually breathing into those areas and opening them back up so our connective tissue can actually open up space to allow our white blood cells, our red blood cells, and our enzymes and everything else to fit through those gaps again, to be able to navigate the body in a really healthy manner, so we can send all the healing elements that the body knows it needs to where it knows it needs it. We're just assuming. So really what we're doing is creating an environment by opening and softening the body that is allowing the body to maximize its fluid potential, almost its ability to have life force, have energy in the way of cellular cells and enzymes and proteins and blood cells and white blood cells, and all sorts of substances move through the body in a nice fluid and conducive manner, as opposed to getting stuck and building up adhesions and blockages when those areas are not formed in a conducive way, and not formed in a natural way that the body should be open and structurally aligned. Okay, so this brings to a really important point why I believe Qigong is is really important, and why it's an important time for Qigong to come out. And let me backstep one moment. So one of the reasons I created the Qigong teacher training programs I run is because I began to see a bit of a trend where yoga people were starting to make Qigong yoga, because they knew yoga and they want a new practice, and so they were learning certain things. And I could see online different things happening, and as someone who's really passionate about Qigong and about Tai Chi and about this idea of internal movement not being lost, I kind of wanted to start creating avenues for people to learn and really stay true to the concepts of Qigong, because they're so rich within their own right that getting lost through popular culture would be an extremely unfortunate event. And so I also believe this concept is within yoga, and I'm not writing off yoga. I love yoga. I've practiced yoga before. There's nothing wrong with it. But this idea of softening into posture, and the very Taoist concept of not really trying, becomes really important. As an acupuncturist, I actually have treated lots of yogis for conditions where they've overstretched. And they've literally pulled their tension system so out of alignment through being massively flexible in certain ways that potentially their body wasn't really designed for, or hasn't been stretched in a way that's created that tensegrity to be even. It's like they really like a specific stretch, so they do it so much that it pulls their body out of alignment a certain way. Qigong would find that particularly difficult to do if you're doing it right, simply because you're trying to soften into your original shape. I like that, I'll say that again. Trying to literally soften into your original shape, into the shape that your Jing, your DNA, says that your Qi should form into. That way the Shen can build up as a natural result. So it's really aligning that process through learning how to soften and take on, as I said, the natural shape of our body by softening into it. So yoga has this idea of really stretching, and yoga classes can be quite strong. I'm finding more and more I talk about this and the more I engage with people, there is a large demographic of people in the society that just literally say to me, I don't like yoga. I've tried Qigong once or twice and I love it. So maybe the world's just divided into two different people. I don't know. But that idea that just learn to stop. Just learn to do one move continuously, and learning the truth of one movement. Learning the truth of how your body moves with that one movement, doing it repeatedly and just softening into it, has a certain beauty and a certain mindfulness, and teaches us things that only stopping and only stillness and only returning to ourselves can do. There's no trying to reach forward, like stretching into the future, or reaching or grasping. There's only softening into how you are right now. And I mean, as I said, that's kind of in yoga too, yes, but in a lot of modern yoga, that's not done so much. People have westernized it a lot into this concept of really trying And there's massive crowds of yoga people who are extremely fit, and I see who are still extremely rigid and very, rigid, and not at all the kind of floppy, relaxed, soft, pliableness that we're looking for with Qigong. With Qigong, we have a little bit more of that Taoist concept, I believe, of almost trying to be like water, be like putty, be moldable, be changeable. We're not trying to reach or grasp, it's just exactly where you are, and you're just softening right into that moment. And so I think that's a really important message, and for people to understand in today's society and learn how to stop and how to just embody that state of mindfulness and peace and quiet, which Qigong type invokes. And so this kind of gets into a little bit now how Qigong is a bit of a somatic therapy. I have myself been through some pretty stressful, pretty traumatic situations, and I can attest personally to the way that Qigong works with the body, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And it's a really important concept to get with this idea of our meat suit with our Qi and this Jing, Qi, Shen, that it is actually all homogeneous. And the physical and the emotional and the spiritual are all overlaid together. And so in Chinese, they basically believe that tension is disease. Tension, and that can be physical tension, emotional, mental tension, or spiritual tension, and it's both in our muscles and in our mind at the same time. They're homogeneous, they are one and the same. There is no real separation. So stiffness and pain in your shoulder, holding in a certain way, has a certain psychological and spiritual effect on you as well, which we know is kind of the basic concept of holistic therapies and holistic medicine and holistic living. So by softening and deleting these tension patterns out of our body, we're actually also working on releasing trauma, releasing stress, releasing anxieties, releasing depressions. The physical practice of Qigong literally teaches you to delete these tension patterns. You find them in your body. As you're standing and as you're softening, you start to feel areas and you begin to peel yourself like an onion as you get more sensitive, and you can find little pockets of tension, and you slowly begin to kind of go, oh, hold on, if I just, and it releases. Now just think of what you've done. You've literally just taught yourself how to connect to an area of your body that you can hardly even normally sense. Now, I was giving a client of mine a little shoulder reset massage thing I do at the end of her acupuncture session. She suffers from quite extremely tight neck and shoulders. It's not pleasant. And as I hold specific points, you can feel her body's like waiting. It's waiting and it's building. And then sometimes I say to clients when they're experiencing this, I say to this woman, I said, just feel into exactly where you need to release right now, and just like, as if your hand was tense, just relax your hand. And so when you can do that in a three-dimensional sense, and you can find it, locate it, and learn the reality of how to soften and how to relax that area, over time and over practice, your body begins to learn how to remain soft, how to remain relaxed. You can feel that tension creeping, and you can just automatically go into your body and switch it off. And you get better and better at this through the process. And so this is also a way that emotions do the same thing. Sitting in a traffic jam, noticing certain emotions, certain stress, certain things rising, and learning to soften that off. Why am I taking that on? So Qigong teaches us how to kind of try and release that, how to soften and relax into our body. Now, one of the last points I wanted to talk about, sorry I haven't been checking time very well, is how Qigong builds our energy system for energy healing. This is a really important point. I've been talking to a lot of people about this recently, because sometimes when I'm trying to explain to someone who does Reiki what Qigong is, I say, well, Qigong's kind of like Reiki exercise. Oh, okay, and they get that. So whilst it's an energetic exercise, though, it's also a very physical exercise Qigong, and it should be, because we're trying to change and reprogram the body. But the way that Qigong builds the Qi, the way we cultivate, and again, remember Qi, I'm talking about the meat suit, okay? Our actual body. The way Qigong develops our body and evolves our body allows us to actually build real physical resource. As we're doing our Qigong and we're using this internal tension and getting our whole body to remain in this tensegrity frame that builds up pressure, our body's literally getting a level of force placed on it that begins to create a density to the body. And this density is done, like, it's the same kind of density, different density, but you know how like bodybuilders and football players and really big, strong, robust people who do a lot of physical training, they have a certain density to their tissues, okay? They're dense and they're strong. Whilst you're never going to build up the muscle mass of someone who does, weights and physical exercise, doing Qigong still builds up that density, but in a very soft, in a very pliable way. So there's no tension, and allows the movement of the body and allows Qi to move through it. So we're still building up physical resource where our bones will be getting denser, our muscles will be getting more nerve endings to the muscle fibers, which will create more muscle fibers, which will make the arms and the whole body denser. So we're literally packing the body full of Qi. We're just not doing it in the same way that we're doing it with weights. And so it doesn't affect our body in the same way. And of course, doing a little bit of weight training and physical exercise, of course, really good for us. But by doing our Qigong, we can kind of circumvent that overtraining, and we can wind it into other training regimes. And actually, maybe I just won't even touch on this because it's a huge topic. But the idea is for healing that by doing Qigong, we're building up the physical resource. And if anyone out there is like an energy worker, you do heaps of Reiki, heaps of body work on people, you're an acupuncturist, whatever the case may be, it's quite exhausting, right? It's a big day after you've treated a couple of clients, and many times it can feel like you may as well just be a labourer if you feel as exhausted. Then in Reiki, they kind of teach you to go and do Reiki on yourself. And I'm saying to Reiki people now, you should probably do Qigong. So traditionally in China, remember at the start when I said it's like yoga's got all these little offshoot types of yoga, like pranayama and ashtanga and vishnasana and then Qigong, you've got all the different types of Qigong. You've got even Tai Chi, and then crane Qigong, and this type of Qigong and that type of Qigong. In Qigong too, you've also got it's a healing modality at its pinnacle, a hands-on healing. And in ancient China, they used to call that Wei Qi Liao Fa, which means healing with your external energy, basically. And the idea was, through our Qigong practice, through learning our Qigong and building our body and getting our body nice and soft so that the Qi can just move through our body and nice and ripple and it's all nice and smooth and my whole body is active in the motion. One part of my body moves, the whole body moves. It's in tensegrity, so it's building up massive amounts of heat and energy and work in our body that we can then learn how to transfer that to other people. That was always the traditional kind of lineage that they worked in China. The idea that you cultivated yourself first, which is the kind of that first level of Qigong energy cultivation. You heal yourself, you make yourself well. You can't be treating other people if you're sick, was their concept. If you have your own illnesses, then you probably need to cultivate and build your own energy first to get nice and strong and robust. Then the second level is actually energy transfer. Now, this is a lot of the time in Qigong, they skip straight to the third level, and this middle level isn't, I believe, necessarily always done, and I don't believe it always necessarily has to be done either. So I'm not biased about it, but this idea of learning the transmission is learning a technique called Fa Jing, or Fa Jing, which is explosive energy. There's kind of two different levels of that because it also becomes non-explosive and getting into the martial arts aspect, but it's also how we learn to cultivate massive amounts of energy and then learn to really push it out of the whole body. It is actually quite a physical thing. There is physical reality to it, much the same way that, let me explain this, right? So if I had a 20 kilo plate, 20 kilo dumbbell or something on the ground and told you to pick it up, you'd probably bend down and pick it up nice and slowly, okay? And if we did that a few times, but then I swapped the weight to like 5 kilos, but it was the same size, it looked identical, and you thought it was 20 kilos, you'd go down and go, and you'd nearly jump off the ground, right? Because you were prepared for so much work to be done. So in Qigong, what we're doing is we're kind of doing the same. We're thinking that we're dealing with a 20 kilo weight, but there's nothing there. And so it teaches us our body how to move and how to work to release a large amount of energy. But because there's no work happening, because I'm not physically lifting something up or pushing something, the energy gets there and goes, oh, there's no weight here. I know what I'll do. I will communicate and transfer into this other person and help them because they don't look very well. Or I will circulate back through my own body and look for things that I can heal inside me. So this energy transference is a way of learning how to build up large amounts of energy so you can then push them into other people. And quite literally, I like the idea of push or pump. Another word maybe communicate. And I also like that concept that when we're actually energy treating, we're actually biocommunicating to other people. Then at the third level, we've got that idea of medical Qigong, when you're really actually working on people at a high level to really help them heal their injuries and work with their body in this sense of cultivating their energy and getting their body to shift. And so that's kind of that really Reiki level. And so Qigong comes in on those two bottom levels and can really teach people who are doing energy work or body work or Reiki work to put an extra level of oomph, an underpinning of physical reality, of dense material for which to produce energy from, to strengthen our body. And as I was saying, Qigong is about growing the body. So about growing the body into a really robust, healthy state so there is an abundance of energy of which to give other people. And I'm sure there's lots and lots of Reiki practitioners out there with beautiful hearts that probably have no problem with giving energy, but maybe almost dredge themselves by giving so much. And Qigong would be a really nice practice for people like that to be able to sink their feet back into the earth, to be able to build up their own energy and replenish their supply. All right, guys. Now, I'll open the floor up to a few questions. I can see a couple of comments on the screen. A couple of people watching. There's a good 10 of us. So does anyone have any questions or want me to go over anything I've mentioned? Just type away in the question box there. While you're typing away, I'd like to keep doing more of these talks. It's great practice for me. And hopefully you found some of the information helpful and you've gleaned something interesting out of it. As always, when you do these kind of talks, you're like, oh my God, I missed out so much that I'd normally say, which I'm doing right now. But next week, what I want to talk on more is going into deleting this tension, giving a few exercises and a bit of an experiential reality to what I've talked about today, and to really begin consolidating that idea of the mind-body matrix and how we can work with it to delete physical tension to help us heal injuries, as well as emotional and work through spiritual dilemmas. So I want to talk a little bit more about that next week. Now I've got a question. Energy transference, love this. The robust building of a body is so interesting. What else is great for this? Well, really, healthy living and any sort of physical exercise. The reason I believe Qigong is probably better than this, so like, you know, if you're a really fit, robust person and you enjoy regular exercise and you eat well and you have a physically strong body, then yeah, you've got a much better reserve of biological resource. And I like that word when I describe it. You've got lots of calcium in the bones. You've got lots of stem cells in the bones. Your cell structure's strong. You know, you'd be able to go out and rough and tumble with someone a little bit. Like, your body's physically capable. It's robust. I love that word for this. Your body's robust. So anything that really does that, of course, is going to give you a better physical substrate and biological resource to draw from. However, Qigong does really makes you soft. It creates that nice, relaxed body state that allows energy to transfer. And so, I've just got another. Hi, Charlotte. New to Qigong, a Reiki practitioner. Who's really interesting talk. Thank you. A unison between two modules. Thank you. So now I normally don't do a lot of this because Tai Chi at its pinnacle and the Fa Jing is explosive. It's loud. And really it's designed for survival fighting, so it's quite violent. But let me just quickly tell a story about that. There's two types of Fa Jing. You've got the explosive Fa Jing that I'll show you in a moment. Then you've got soft Fa Jing, which you really have to be in mode for, and I can demonstrate, but it's a bit fake. You know, it happens when it happens. And you really, have to be in mode. But the interesting thing about the soft Fa Jing is that I actually saw shaman using it when I was in the Amazon jungle a good 12 years ago at an ayahuasca retreat. And the Shipibo tribesmen and tribeswomen were using this soft Fa Jing technique as a healing technique, and were quite shocked when a little white guy from Australia just pulled out beside them and copied them. And they found it even more interesting when I started explaining to them where I'd learnt this skill. And so I didn't see them really do it in the explosive manner, but they definitely had an idea how to do this as soft Fa Jing, which is the more medical expression of, now my head's going to cut out of this, but you won't really see my body. And what you'll notice is how much my body shakes like my toothpaste tube. Now, this is a martial art I'm doing, so this isn't necessarily Qigong, but it's a form of Qigong that I'm doing that teaches this ability. And this should be in a lot of our Qigongs. Like, there's Qigongs when, we might stretch up and we get our hands and we release that energy. So that's like an explosive Fa Jing. If I was doing it as a martial art, my head's going to get cut out. Sorry about that. I might do something. Okay, so that was a strike, and you saw my arm bounce because my body's just elastic. There's no tension there. It's not like, I'm punching solidly. It's my body shakes, and there's just a ripple from my core, from my spine, coming out through my body. And so the idea is, being so loose, you squeeze the toothpaste tube, you squeeze your core, and you get the Jing squeezing with the Qi, squeezing up with the Shen, to release a lot of energy. So what this means for our Qigong is that what we see a lot of people doing in Qigong today, and one of the other reasons, one of my big passions for starting these courses, was that Qigong is becoming very external. And I call this kind of level 1, so I find there's 5 different levels of Tai Chi. And you can see here that just my arms are moving. The definition of an internal movement should be if one part moves, the whole body moves. So this is just my arms moving. But if I wanted to get my whole body in, I have to start moving like if I was loose and throwing my arms up. So my arms are so loose, if I stop, they'll just fall down. But if I swing my body, I can get my arms to move. And this creates a fluidity between all the muscle chains and all the fascia, creates connectivity between all the muscles and the fascia, and gets everything moving in a very tight tensegrity, which condenses the energy down and stores and puts that energy into, in a Chinese sense, condensing that energy deeper into our body. And that's the idea of energy cultivation in Chinese medicine, is to make the energy condensed, compact, pushing it down, making it denser and denser in our body. So our bodies are actually stronger, more robust, more structurally sound, but are also extremely soft and relaxed. All right. So, if there's any last questions, I'll grab them now. I think we're probably just about at time, judging by things. I didn't put a clock beside my thing. It's a bit silly. I do have different courses I run on teacher training events, but they're also aimed at just anyone who is interested. I go right through the classical concepts of Qigong, as well as paint the picture with the information I have today to help span that gap between how the traditional theory and the modern science are really actually starting to overlap. And with a lot of the breathing science that's coming out and movement science that's coming out, mewing, if you've heard of mewing, with the different ways that you use your tongue in your mouth, neck posture, with all these different aspects starting to come in, and you know how we control our nervous system and work with our brain. What I've really discovered is so many of these can just be pulled into kind of going, well, that's Qigong. That's all. That's everything of that. It's kind of helps us become the way that we want to be, the way we want to inhabit, the way we want to embody our bodies, our mind-body matrix, this thing, this fleshy, this meat shell that we've got, how we want to embody that and how we want to be in that. So Qigong literally teaches us how to evolve into being that more evolved shape of ourselves, grow into ourselves, develop and mature. It's very interesting. Actually, the last thing I'll say on this, because I just sprung into my mind, is I was chatting to a lady from America the other day who was telling me about her autistic son. And I know she joined this page, and her answer was that she gave for one of my questions was incredible. And I was like, wow, please tell me more about that. And she sent me some links to articles talking about how autistic people have like this sensory deprivation, and that's what gives them the certain disabilities that they suffer from. And it was really very interesting because she was interested in learning more about Qigong to help with this condition, because she'd started to read about people working with how to build up people with autism's perceptions and your senses. And that's the one thing that I find the best about Qigong, is it's a whole body mindfulness exercise. It's not like you're just sitting down and meditating or just stuck in a posture like yoga. It's the whole body has to be constantly moving as one entity through the whole exercise. So there's no difference between the way an arm's moving to the way the weight is in the foot. It brings everything into a balance. I've often liked it too. You can imagine the shape of a human body, and it's a shame I don't have an acupuncture meridian chart in my clinic here. But if you can imagine the meridians almost as like iridescent light tubes, you know, the light tubes you get in the roof, the long ones. Imagine if they were folded round, and like the stomach meridian that went up here was like a tube of light in the body, and all these tubes were put together. When you're moving in internal movement, it should almost be a symphony of the way that the light is pumping and moving through each of the conduits. And so when you get into that state, it's a very deeply mindful state, because the mind and body have to become one with the breath for that to happen. So you may remember earlier in this talk, I mentioned that the 3 different regulations of Qigong were breath, body, and mind. And so really, once you start getting these things working in harmony together, when you're exercising, it creates a state where, and I always say to people, like, Qigong makes me feel like I'm evaporating. I evaporate into the environment around me. I'm in a state of peripheral vision, I'm in peripheral hearing, I'm in peripheral sensations of my body. And it kind of just helps me dissolve past my physical mass and become something that is just being there in the environment. So I think I may have had a question a moment ago. Thanks, Claire. Becca, awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, so guys, I think I'm just on time. So if there's no more questions, I might sign out and leave you with that idea that we should just learning Qigong to kind of dissolve ourselves into our natural shape. Alrighty, thank you very much, guys. I hope you've gleaned something from this talk. Thank you very much. I'll be back on next week at the same time. I'm going to go a little bit more into the physical. I did bring my whiteboard, but I didn't end up using it. I probably will next week. So thank you very much for coming. And yeah, I hope you're all well. Thank you so much. Bye.